5600.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios.
Insert Democrat socialist here.
Runs the Democratic House floor for 30 plus years running. He's promising this and he's stealing that. Where can you get that kind of money? He's using your house like his own piggy bank. You ought to know by now. You can pay off your house here in Illinois, but you can never keep up with the taxes. Oh, how it's always been the plan to have a taxpayer pay, no doubt. Not a matter of if anymore, but when. You're moving out. I said, when you're moving out.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. That theme music means it's time for our weekly conversation, all things Illinois policy related with the wirepoints.org folks. Benefits fraud. Remarkable story coming out of California, and you know there's application to Illinois. We talked about one story that broke yesterday. Federal prosecutors charging a illegal immigrant from Kazakhstan who overstayed a temporary visa 3 years ago and has allegedly bilked the Medicare out of upwards of $1 billion, $1 billion with a B. And of course, this is just scratching the surface. We know we still have this unexplained 8x increase in human services spend since Pritzker was elected governor, running 8x faster, 8 times faster than the increase in overall state spending, even as population is declining. So how do you explain that? Well, they don't feel the need to even attempt to explain it. But obviously one of the explanations is providing human services, allowing benefits transfers to people who are not otherwise eligible for them under law. Those would be people in this country legally residing in Illinois. And also just the endemic fraud of the system. We're only a few years removed from a $5 billion fraud scandal with the state's unemployment insurance program. You know, $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real amounts of other people's money. But listen to this Fox News report, which included commentary from, speaking of Medicare, the director of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, that would be Dr. Oz. The potential extent of the fraud in California, which comes as no surprise, dwarfs that of Minnesota.
One doctor billed the government $120 million in a single year, claiming to oversee 1,900 patients. With almost 2,000 hospice agencies, L.A. County has more than 36 states combined, and 30 times more than either Florida or New York.
18% of the whole country's home health care billing is coming out of Los Angeles County. How is that possible?
And take a look at this map, a cluster of 287 hospice providers in a 2-mile radius, some in strip malls, unmarked buildings, even a wrecking yard and vacant lot.
All of it is just paperwork. I could fill that out in Kazakhstan if I want and get a hospice license waiting for me.
Yeah, well, and some apparently are. I mean, so the clusters, sort of the big tell, it seems, as we're hearing more and more of these stories from around the country. Clusters of home health care providers, clusters of hospice care providers, clusters of medical transport providers. That Dr. Oz standing outside of that building in Minneapolis the other week, talking about 400 businesses of the same sort, home health care, in this industrial building, one industrial building in Minneapolis. Wait till we have federal prosecutors, because I guess that's what we're going to have to rely on, really starting to scratch below the surface in Illinois. For more on the topic, Mark Glennon, founder, wirepoints.org. Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Happy Tuesday, Dan. That news story about the $1 billion at least in Medicare fraud. We have an article posted from CWB about it. There was an indictment here in Chicago recently. But what's curious about it is that story was out there. It just never got picked up. I started researching that back in June. The Washington Post had an article about the pending investigation, but it's what that tells you is that this stuff has become so rampant that these things can fall through the cracks, even though it's this massive amount of money and a very flagrant fraud, apparently.
Well,
really
fall through the cracks or be willfully ignored by the legacy media, such that a CWB Chicago has to unearth it. One of the smaller independent media operations or individuals, as we saw with Nick Shirley in Minneapolis, been reported, but it takes some stick-to-itiveness and independent news organizations or journalists to unearth it, perhaps again, in order to get it to the point of public consumption.
Exactly right. Shame on the regular media for burying this. And boy, you're right. Illinois is a target-rich environment for this stuff. We've only begun to get our arms around the scope of the potential targets here. Thousands of these NGOs that get no scrutiny in their express grants that come from the state legislature every year. And it's a tedious process to go through them all. But as I understand it, as we've discussed, the Department of Justice is doing so, and I have no doubt they're going to get some results.
Well, interesting, just the juxtaposition, because what California is doing, don't be surprised if some enterprising Marxist in Illinois won't try the same. Certainly it would have the support of BLM Brandon. Jelly Belly may not want to do that with an eye towards the White House in 28. But talking about, at the same time, you have just the beginnings of exposing systemic benefits fraud in California. They have this ballot initiative, November referendum, the November ballot, that would establish a one-time 5% wealth tax on Californians with more than $1 billion in assets. SEIU argues this would raise $100 billion in revenue. But Gavin Newsom, of all people, taking note of all the billionaires that are divesting from California, Gavin Newsom said, quote, "The impact of a one-time tax does not solve an ongoing structural challenge. You would have a windfall one time, maybe, and then over the years you would see a significant reduction in taxes because taxpayers will move." You don't say. I mean, wow, that is revelatory. It turns out, Mark, that people with the ability to move will move themselves and their assets if the government is going to seize them. Shocking.
Yeah, it's an actual dose of sanity from Gavin Newsom. So often that's kind of the litmus test of choosing your politicians and policies. Is it sane or not? And there's so much insanity going on, including that from California and so much that we have in Illinois. It's not hard to figure out what's suicidal. I'm pure suicidal. Our own government is doing this to us in so many states, and it did it to us during the Biden administration nationally.
But I mean, on a small scale, they're trying the same thing here. BLM Brandon mentioned it, and obviously he's got all of these neo-Marxists in the General Assembly that are proposing, quote-unquote, progressive revenue streams, progressive revenue bills, like the millionaire surcharge. I mean, the millionaire surcharge, that's just a smaller version of the billionaire's wealth tax in California, and it will produce similar results directionally. I mean, so this is actually happening in real time here. Just nobody will acknowledge it the way that Gavin Newsom did.
Yeah, and Pritzker continues to talk about rekindling the progressive income tax increase, continues to distort the immigration numbers. We had the new census numbers come out showing once again net out migration from Illinois. He focuses on total population that includes all the illegals here. Over 500,000 illegals in Illinois. You want to know why we got housing costs that are high? Because they live somewhere, and that drives up prices.
There was a headline this week on the public safety front that should be addressed. Chicago Tribune reporting uncritically, as is their wont. a record murder clearance rate of 71% in 2025. Paul Vallis had a piece over at Chicago Contrarian on this. I mean, there's no way. And it turns out, yes, there is no way. That's just completely, that is, talk about misinformation. I heard Jeannie Ives' commentary about the health misinformation police. How about the crime stats misinformation police? But of course, it would be only in the direction of the truth in this state. Paul Vallis writes in the Contrarian, only a fourth of last year's murders have resulted in arrests. Arrest rates for non-lethal shootings and other serious crimes remain barely above 10%. The clearance rate for murders includes all homicide cases closed in a given year for murders committed in both the current and previous years, divided by the number of murders committed in 1 year. When the total number of murders decline, the clearance rate automatically appears to improve. The metric is further inflated by a sharp increase in cases classified as quote-unquote cleared without an arrest ever being made. So he just goes on to say, look, this is fun with numbers. And the bottom line is, if you look at where the actual public is on police and, by extension, safety, 2024 survey, CPD required by the consent decree found only 33% of residents think Chicago police are doing a good or very good job protecting the city. They may want to think about the choices they're making for civilian political leaders, but I digress. That which is a third, which is virtually unchanged since 2020. So since the height of the spike in violent crime during COVID, the sort of approval rating, if you will, or the safety rating, if you will, has remained unchanged. Just 27% trust that reform will have lasting impact. So there's this disconnect between the beautiful lies you're hearing from JB and BJ and their fellow travelers and what people actually believe they're experiencing in the neighborhoods in which they actually live in Chicago, and all of this papering over it with, historic declines in homicides and this phony baloney murder clearance rate will not dissuade them from the reality they're living.
Yeah, every time we post one of those articles about declining crime rates in Chicago, people jump on it. I hear from our readers who say, Chicagoans who say, this is nonsense. It's not dropping. And they can't really point to the reasons why, except that maybe they got mugged or their house got broken into and there was no investigation, nothing ever followed up. And so, I've wondered, how do you get to the bottom of this? What's really the truth? And props to Paul Vallis on that article in Chicago Contrarian. He did a very thorough job explaining why what you just described, that the numbers are bunk. And I think hopefully we'll start getting some truth on that.
Mark Glennon, founder of Wirepoints, wirepoints.org, all things Illinois policy related. You can also get Mark's writings at substack.com/@Mark Glennon. Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Take care.
And you too. And Mark joined us on Chicago's Morning Answer.
This is the morning show more Chicago radio listeners are choosing. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560.